Documentaries often take years, and that's rarely talked about. In this episode, filmmaker and grant mentor Jilann Spitzmiller joins me to discuss sustaining funding over long timelines, navigating the emotional middle, and why a slow process doesn't mean you're failing. This is an honest and grounded conversation about endurance, transparency, and staying in the work. Last episode, we talked about funding, not simply as a way of paying for a documentary, but as a way of inviting other people into it, about the trust that forms when someone believes enough in your story to help carry it alongside you. But eventually, every documentary filmmaker discovers something else, that getting the money to begin is only the beginning. There was a moment very early on in the making of our film Elvis of Cambodia, the fall of 2014, that I've never forgotten. My wife and I had packed up our lives, moved to Cambodia with our 8-month-old son Flynn to film what would become our feature documentary. And our intention was to stay in Cambodia after the 5 months that we would take to shoot the film. We would start building our lives there. And then just before Christmas, we ran out of money. And yes, I'm well aware this is starting to sound like a running theme over the past couple of episodes. But we ran out of money not because we'd been reckless. We'd simply spent every waking hour either making the film or thinking about how to make our film, and very little time thinking about how to sustain the people making it. So we packed up, and while the film wasn't finished, we really didn't see any other way. And I remember getting up before sunrise in the morning we left. Our nanny, who had cared for Flynn nearly every day for those 5 months, came to say goodbye. She handed me a letter she'd written in English, which was incredible because her English was rudimentary. And it was one of the most beautiful letters I've ever received. She wrote about what our family had meant to her, about how much she loved Flynn, about hoping that one day we'd all see each other again. As I stood there holding that letter, I realized I didn't know when we'd be back. And I didn't know whether we even had enough of a story to make our film. I didn't know how I was going to earn a living once we'd returned to Portland in the U.S. What I did know was that the film suddenly felt like it had been put on a shelf. And as you already know, that's a feeling that would visit me more than once over the next 10 years. But I kept talking about the film to friends and colleagues, which of course wasn't all that difficult because many asked about it. But I also freely talked about it because I still believed in it, and because talking about it kept it alive. But the reality was, the focus now had to be providing for my family. The film would have to wait. And with that waiting came something I wasn't prepared for. There was some shame, some embarrassment, maybe even some guilt. And not because I thought the film was going to be bad, but because I thought I was letting it down. Letting down the people who had trusted me with their stories. Letting down everyone who believed the film would be finished sooner. Maybe even letting down myself. If I'm being totally honest, if I had known then just how torturous this process would become, how many times we'd stop, how many times we'd start again, how many years it would ask of our family, well, I probably never would have made the film. And maybe that's one of documentary's quiet mercies. Because none of us can know at the beginning what a film will eventually ask of us. If we did, I wonder how many documentaries would ever get made. Now, the payoff part of this story came later when we finally returned to Cambodia. I remember seeing many of the same familiar faces, and on those faces, I didn't see any frustration. There was no resentment. Just these warm, expectant smiles that seemed to say, "We knew you'd be back." It was as though the film had simply been waiting for us. And that's something I wish someone had told me all those years ago, that a documentary isn't measured by uninterrupted momentum. The truth is that sometimes life asks you to step away, to earn a living, or maybe to raise children, to care for the people you love. So the question isn't whether your film pauses. The question is whether, when the time comes, you find your way back. Because maybe your film isn't gone. Maybe, just maybe, it is simply waiting for you. One of the greatest challenges in documentary filmmaking isn't finding the funding to begin, it's finding the faith to return. Welcome back to The Documentary Life. This is a show about how to live and lead your own documentary life. I'm your host, Chris G. Parkhurst, and this is episode number 143, How Do I Sustain Funding for My Film? Before we get to today's conversation, I wanted to let you know about something I've put together that I genuinely wish someone had handed me when I first started making documentaries. It's called the Documentary Life Field Guide, a collection of lessons, reflections, and practical insights drawn from more than 25 years of making nonfiction films. It's about storytelling, sustainability, funding, interviews, creative life, and learning how to build a life around documentary filmmaking that's both meaningful and sustainable. Now, you can download it for free by visiting thedocumentarylife.com. Just enter your email address and I'll send it straight to your inbox. And remember, stories matter, listening matters, human connection matters. Jilann Spitzmiller is a veteran documentary filmmaker with over 30 years of experience in long-range, character-driven cinema verite storytelling. Her work has been supported by organizations including the Sundance Institute, ITVS, and the Open Society Institute, and she is a Sundance Documentary Fellow. Her films include Meow Wolf Origin Story, which premiered at South by Southwest, screened in over 600 theaters, and is now on Apple TV, and Shakespeare Behind Bars, which premiered at Sundance, won 11 awards, and received wide theatrical and international broadcast distribution. She is currently directing and producing Shakespeare Beyond Bars, a 20-year follow-up due in 2027. Jilann has also served as a cinematographer on numerous independent documentaries, and her work has appeared on outlets including PBS, CNN, BBC, Al Jazeera, Sundance Channel, and Discovery. She regularly teaches and mentors emerging filmmakers through organizations such as BAI, AFI Docs, and NALIP. Jilann, welcome to The Documentary Life. This has been a long time coming. I told you early on we'd had Faith Fuller a couple of times on the show, so we're actually excited to have you joining us today.
Oh, thanks so much. And I love Faith. She's the best.
So I guess as sort of a warm-up question, if you will, into our subject today, I would say, you've worked on documentaries that unfold over many, many years. At what point did you realize that this idea of long-haul filmmaking isn't the exception, that it is, in fact, the norm to be working on a documentary film for a very long time?
Yeah, I think that's always something that really surprises people, even if they're watching a film that takes place over time, well, my husband Hank and I have made a bunch of films together, almost all those ones that you listed, but our first feature was called Homeland, and we were following some families on the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, and it was about contemporary Native life, and we thought, okay, we'll film for 1 year. That sounds good. But the funding, it was our first film. The funding was slow in coming. We were just getting it in little bits. And, we just never had enough together to finish it. And we were shooting on 16 millimeter film at that time. So there was quite an expense in terms of negative cutting and printing and all that, so you couldn't just throw it together on Premiere. But so we just kept filming. We'd raise little pots of money or put stuff on credit cards, which I don't recommend. And we ended up filming for 3 years for that film, just because of the funding cycle mostly. And we realized along the way, at 1 year the stories weren't really developed enough. We needed more time. And so at about the 3 year point, it started feeling really good, and we started editing, and eventually we got an ITVS, agreement, and that helped us finish the film properly and all that. But that was, we started in 1996 and it aired in 2000. So, and then, we were schooled by then. We were like, okay, this is a much longer process than we thought. And every film we've done has pretty much taken 5 years. I hate
Yeah.
to even like say it, but it's the
Yeah.
truth. Even with the one we're making right now, we thought, okay, this will be a quickie like follow up to Shakespeare Behind Bars. We're just gonna check in on people and do a little filming and we'll do a quick edit. But
Yeah.
nope, we started in 2022. Looks like it's coming out in 2027. So
Yeah.
there you go.
Well,
Five
even as I
years.
read that, yeah, even as I read that it was coming out in 2027, there was a little part of me that's like, I wonder if she hates that I'm saying that
I
because I
know.
know what that
We
feels
hope.
like. Right.
Yeah, well,
Accountability, that's what it is.
putting it out there, let's
Yes,
manifest,
totally.
setting the intention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you think filmmakers are so often, and my audience, there are a lot of first and second time documentary filmmakers in the audience. Why do you
Yay, go
think,
guys.
yay, why do you think filmmakers are so often unprepared, both financially and emotionally, for how long the documentaries actually take?
Well, I think it's such a divide between watching a film and making a film. And I think we watch films and we just watch them effortlessly and they flow into us and they stay in our subconscious. And, we just have no idea what's behind that curtain of making it. And there's, 1,000 to 10,000 steps in that process. And it's just like you don't know what you don't know. And the idea overtakes you. I feel like the idea always will tap me on the shoulder and some go away and some will not go away and some just demand to be made, fortunately or unfortunately. And I think that's what happens with first time filmmakers. You see the world, you're engaged with it, and you want to tell a story. And that is such a driver, right? That it can help us get through all the obstacles in our way. And I've seen it time and time again. I've taught at this community college where I lived for 10 years. I don't do that anymore, but I would get all these wonderful, mature adults in my classes, like over the age 50. I would get all these really cool people who had lived their lives to a great extent and had a lot of experience, and then they come in with this idea like, I have to make this film. And that was always so inspiring to me that they had such a drive to tell a story, but also it was like, wah, wah, wah. Guess
Oh
what you
man,
have to
yeah,
do
you
to
don't know
do
what's
that?
coming.
Yeah, so I think it's just like a really a beautiful reflection of the human spirit that people want to tell stories and they want to get them out there widely. And then it's just, helping people walk through that reality for the first time. And even like your second time, you're still learning huge lessons, and your third time. And, every film brings its own set of lessons. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I hope I
You know,
answered your question.
you certainly did, and it brings something up for me, and it's something I think about, or I have a number of times over the years. I think about of all the forms and formats of art. Why did I have to choose filmmaking? It's just like and this is not to put down any other form of art, but it's like, why couldn't I have just written music?
The
Why
most
couldn't I
expensive.
have been a painter? Yeah, it's like the most expensive, the most like so many processes where something can go wrong. It's just you're reliant on so many other people at times, and things can collapse at any moment. It's just yeah,
Legal issues, real
yeah,
people.
yeah,
It's a nightmare. A
yeah.
gorgeous, beautiful nightmare.
I don't know how films get made. Even though we make films, yeah, they're a miracle. They really are.
Yeah, each film is its own miracle. Yeah, and
Let's talk about the moment, that filmmakers, where filmmakers quietly panic. That initial, where maybe the initial grant money is gone, or where money that they had at all is gone, where film clearly isn't finished. What's actually happening at that stage? What are we experiencing?
oh man, I've been at this place so many times, and
Yeah.
to be honest with you, I'm right there back again.
Yeah, yeah. Okay,
It's,
then maybe we take the
yeah.
perspective of what is it that you're experiencing? What is it we experience in that moment? And then you can speak from experience of having had that experience a number of times. What do you now tell yourself? What is it that you recognize and what can you now do to help?
Well, making a film is about commitment, right? And a lot of people will start the process and they run through all those obstacles and they say, okay, I'm not in for this. But if you've committed yourself and you are definitely going to finish that film, it's sort of like it's by any means necessary except anything illegal or harmful to yourself, right? So, I think it's a matter of taking the long view and seeing it done, right? So believing in the fact and believing in yourself that you are going to finish it, being realistic. How are you going to finish it? So, when I'm starting a project, I always build my dream budget, right? And it's this
Mm,
gorgeous budget that allows for everything. And then I also make a bare bones budget that's like, okay, at the very least, I need this much.
okay.
And usually it falls somewhere in between. And, a lot of people think, if they've done narrative work or whatever, that, okay, you get all the money and then you make the film. But with documentary, it tends to be you're writing grants throughout the whole making of the film because there are very few grant organizations or investors even that want to give you all the money up front, even if you're an established filmmaker. Like I
Right.
remember like 10 years ago, I was struggling to finish a film and I read that Michael Apted and Barbara Koppel were having trouble getting funding. And these are like two of the most venerated documentary filmmakers ever. And I was like, oh, okay, I don't feel so bad
Yeah.
if they're having trouble. They're
Yeah.
multiple award winners, most famous, so it's sort of, that was a great reality check, like, okay, this is a process.
Yeah.
What can I do to take the next step? And it's so like about looking towards the future but staying in the moment too, and being really resourceful. So I always look at fundraising as like a pie, and there's a bunch of different ways that we're pulling in the funding. And, there's a certain flow to it, right? But then also sometimes you have to pivot and what you count on isn't happening. So you've got to
Yeah.
change it up, and so again, back to this idea that it's very hard to get all the funding up front. So you're applying for development grants and research grants in the beginning. You're applying for mid-stage grants, and then you're applying for finishing funds is kind of
Mm,
the general breakdown I find. Or you're going to forums and markets and you're looking for co-pro or licensing, and that's going to help you finish, but you've got to be pretty far down the road to be able
right.
to show what you have to get that kind of money and to be able to, you know, pitch really well.
If you have ever found yourself asking, how am I going to pay for this documentary? You are most definitely not alone. You've got the vision, you've got the story, but finding the funding to actually bring that story to life, it can feel pretty overwhelming. And that's exactly why I wanted to tell you about the Doc Funding Hub from Desktop Documentaries. Led by award-winning documentary filmmakers Jilann Spitzmiller and Hank Rogerson, the Doc Funding Hub is designed to help documentary filmmakers build real fundraising skills, from grants and donors to community funding and much more. Members receive monthly live webinars, twice monthly funding alerts, access to a growing library of more than a year's worth of past funding sessions, and immediate access to the funding essentials for your documentary course. And because you're a listener of the Documentary Life, you can receive 50% off your first 2 months by visiting desktop-documentaries.com/TDL. Again, that's desktop-documentaries.com/TDL. You'll also find the link in the show notes for this episode. Well, that's just the thing. Like a lot of times we're not that far down the road, right? So
Yeah.
what are the mistakes that you see filmmakers are commonly making when they realize that they need additional funding and they're only midstream?
Well, one thing is some people give up at that point, and I think
Yeah.
that it's okay to like take a pause, and ask yourself
Mm,
like, is this really worth it to me? And then, assess like, okay, maybe I can put off filming for a little while. There's been many times where we've wanted to go film something and we've didn't have the funding and we're like, oh, that would have been so great to have that. But it's just,
mm.
okay, well, we got all this other stuff. So we're just gonna have to let that one go. I find like documentary filmmaking is such a spiritual teacher. It's like
Oh, wow.
it has all the major like spiritual lessons wrapped up inside of it. So one of those is like letting go, right? Another is tenacity or just recommitting. And
Yeah.
a lot of times, we'll be like, okay, we're running on fumes.
Yeah.
What do we need right now? And sometimes we can kind of just reach out to a donor that we've cultivated and say,
Mm,
hey, we're really in a jam, right? And they've funded us before and they trust us and they understand what we're doing now. And that's all about like funder communication. Or say we need a really big chunk and we've got 3 months before we really need it, we could run a crowdfunding campaign.
mm.
Or, I think grant writing is sort of the longest term and hardest thing
It is.
because, like I said, like if you're doing a development grant, let's say, and you're writing that grant and your stuff is starting to happen, you should start filming, but the grant's not going to let you know for 6 months if
Yeah.
you got it or not. So what do you
Yeah.
and
What are
then
you
so
doing in the meantime?
right, and then sometimes the grants are like, well, you can't use this as a reimbursement. You've got
Yeah.
to just use it for
Right.
the here forward. And
Yes.
so we're always like walking that tightrope, right, between what we need and what are the resources. And that is
Yeah.
just a constant process, I think, for any filmmaker. I think I was working with a really prominent filmmaker. You would know her name as a cinematographer, and she
Mm.
still didn't have the funding for a major film she was making, but the things were unfolding and she had to just dive in and shoot it. And I don't know how she financed it, but I was like, okay, well, okay, she's also, in a tight spot. So
Right.
it's it's being really resourceful and really relying on other things that fill your life with fun and joy sometimes.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that. I don't know how fun it is, but while a long-term film continues, filmmakers still we need to live, right? So, what short-term income strategies have you seen work without derailing a longer-term project entirely? Because we have to do that a lot. That's
Right.
part of the documentary life.
Absolutely. Like, I wouldn't be able to survive on just making my own films. I
Yeah.
do a lot of cinematography for other
Right.
people. I consult for younger, newer filmmakers. They don't have to be younger, but newer. I do some editing as well, so I really try to be flexible. For example, this week, right, I'm editing Shakespeare Beyond Bars right now, but I have 2 shoot days in the middle of the week for somebody else, and
Right.
that's great because it's not that much time out of my schedule. I can earn a little nut for that carries me for a bit. So I'm just being really gentle pivoting all the time, right? So
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
would be great to just sit down and dive in and edit all week, but realistically, it's great to have 2 days of shooting, you know?
Do you find, and maybe this was earlier in your career, have there were there moments where you had to step away for longer periods of time? I think you and I are fortunate enough in our careers now where the stepping away is a couple of days at a time or a week at a time. But there were times where I had to step away, sometimes a month or a
Oh,
couple of months at
totally.
a time, right? Or a few months where I had to work or I had to raise funds, or had to go through a whole funding cycle. Talk about that because that's going to speak to a number of our listeners what that time is like and what you do to protect the film and ourselves emotionally while you step away temporarily to earn income.
Yeah, absolutely. There's like nothing wrong with having to do that or no shame in that. It's just sort of normal ebb and flow of making a long-term documentary. You know, if you're making a short doc and you can shoot it in 3 days, then you're not going to have this problem. But I think
Yeah.
if you're in it for a long haul project, this happens to me all the time. When we were making Shakespeare Behind Bars, before we got our major finishing funds from ITVS, we I had a full-time job. So I was actually working full-time, and Hank, my husband and filmmaking partner, was writing and working with the editor. And then I would, I'd have to do this like tricky thing of like, okay, well, actually, he wasn't working with the editor because we were still shooting. So we weren't in post yet. The ITVS money helped us get into post, but
Okay.
we were while we were shooting it, even though we had gotten Sundance grants and other support, we still just had didn't have enough to live on. So that's
Yeah.
great if you can also like do it in partnership with someone where the ball keeps rolling. So he was keeping on top of what was going on with our participants, and he was reviewing footage, and he's also an actor, so he would take some acting work, but
Some gigs.
some gigs, and yeah, so that was reality on that film, and finally we got enough finishing funds, and we could both work on it, and that was a huge relief. But again, like then the film's over, and then what do you do? Okay, you gotta like now we work so hard in distribution, right? When that film came out, it wasn't the same as it is now, so we kind of just gave it to our sales rep, and she did all of that. But it's very
Yeah.
different now, where you'll probably spend it. You could spend a year on distribution. You could spend
Right.
2 years just working on that. So it's kind of like that process is going to extend, where you're still going to have to be supporting yourself. Hopefully, with distribution, some money's coming in, but it's not over when it's over.
It's going to extend the spiritual
The
journey.
good news is you'll have a deeper spiritual journey. Yes.
That's right.
Yeah. But yeah, it's
Looking,
like,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Looking back at your own experience, what helped you keep going? I guess not just practically, but emotionally during the extended projects. Talk about, I guess, like personal grounding here.
Yeah, hiking helps me a lot.
Ah,
Hiking is my mental health savior. And
in the
like,
American Southwest,
yes,
right?
in the American
Yeah.
Southwest. So, it's just finding those things that bring you joy. I remember
Hmm.
we were living in LA, and we were in an apartment in a, you know, apartment neighborhood, and in the back was this tiny little piece of ground land that where all the garbage cans were, and we asked our landlord if we could clean that out and make a garden bed, and she was like sure, and I remember like how much joy that brought me. And then around the same time we won our first award for our first film, Homeland, and it was very exciting, and but it wore off after about 30 minutes, and I thought, actually, what brings me more joy is this little garden that's like
Yeah,
eight
yeah,
eight
yeah,
feet
yeah.
by 8 feet. So, keeping things in perspective, it's like,
Mm,
and being awake to yourself and what sustains you and what makes you happy. And it's just so important to like live your life alongside of the filmmaking and not lose yourself, because it can be really hard to like juggle the making of the film, the learning about making of the film, the sustaining yourself in those times of low funding.
yeah.
It gets really hectic, so you still have to prioritize your own well-being. And that just like, as I've grown older and learned more, it's like that is the most important thing. That is more important than anything, right? Because your
Mm,
film is going to come and go, right? But
mm,
you're sort of stuck with yourself the whole time. So, that, and we have kids, and that's a whole nother thing too. And like last night I was reading with my son, and I mean, he's grown up, but we were reading out loud together because we still like to do that. And it was like, this was such a great way to spend the night. I could have been editing. I was considering like editing after dinner, and I was like, no, I'm gonna hang out with him and do this. And that really filled me up. So that's some of the things I do.
recharges.
Yeah.
If a filmmaker listening feels like they're failing because their film, maybe it's taking too long, right? What would you want that filmmaker to understand about endurance, about legitimacy?
Yeah, I would say that, just keep visualizing that film being done, because it doesn't matter how long it takes. I mean, we're not the news, right? We don't need to get it on TV tonight for it to be relevant. Usually you're telling a story. If you're finding those universal themes in your specific story, then hopefully it's going to be, a timeless thing to some degree. And just that there's no right way to do it. Like every film has its own fingerprint, and you're the guide and the steward, but maybe you need help, right? Maybe you need to bring in some extra help. Maybe you need something more to sustain you. Maybe you need to take a break. Maybe you need to ask someone else, like, what they think of the situation. So I think it's just like finding your community of filmmakers is really important, because we all have these same patterns and flow and times of doubt. And it's really helpful to have a community that's like, I see you, you're doing great work. Or how about if you try this? Or, hey, I have a free camera you could take on your next shoot to help you out
Mm.
financially. Things like that is networking, community, hugely important.
Jilann, I bet I've got some listeners that would love to be able to reach out to you about possible mentoring relationship or your courses that you offer, through desktop documentaries. How can someone reach out to you? What do you offer? Talk a little bit about the courses that are out there as well.
Sure. So Hank and I have done several courses on
Yeah.
desktop documentaries, and it's a great platform for beginning and intermediate filmmakers and even seasoned filmmakers. There's legal resources on there. There's story resources, and what Hank and I have added to the platform in particular is budgeting, which I always like to call my producing course, because you don't know how to budget until you know how to produce.
Yeah.
And so it's a really comprehensive course that talks about the whole process of filmmaking. I have a distribution, DIY kind of roll up your sleeves course on there with my friend Anna Dara. And then Hank has done some great proposal writing courses, pitch deck stuff. And so those are a great place to start. But sometimes also, if you want some one on one help,
Yeah.
I'm available, and I don't know if you can put my email down or whatever in the
Show
on the
notes, baby.
thing.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because
Absolutely.
it's too hard to spell. Um, and also, Hank and I run a monthly class on desktop documentaries called the Documentary Fundraising Hub. So it's basically like a little, very inexpensive membership, and we do a webinar every month on a different topic, and then there's a bunch of resources in there. You can watch all the past webinars. So it's a really low level fee, very accessible, and there's a lot of information in there. So, yeah, different ways.
Wonderful. That's
Thank you.
excellent. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we will definitely put all the information there, Jilann, up in our show notes. So thank you for spelling that out for us. And of course, we'll have that available for everyone. Jilann, I can't thank you enough. This has been a delightful conversation. I would love to have both you and Hank on again onto the show in a future episode. That would be really cool if you guys would be up for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we can talk about teamwork and husband wife and
Totally.
all that crazy. How do we, yeah.
That would be great. How do we navigate that whole
Yeah.
thing, both professionally and personally? We have a lot of stories we could share. That's great. Thank you so much, Jilann.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. Keep going, everybody.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for listening. You can find the show notes for this episode along with links and resources we discussed at thedocumentarylife.com. And if you haven't yet downloaded the Documentary Life Field Guide, you'll find that there as well. It's a free resource designed to help you become a stronger documentary storyteller. And if you're looking for a supportive community of fellow documentary filmmakers to help you stay accountable, gain creative feedback, and keep your project moving forward, applications are currently open for the Documentary Life Mastermind. You can learn more and apply at thedocumentarylife.com/mastermind. If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love to continue it over on YouTube. Just search for The Documentary Life, where you'll find episode clips, conversations, and more. And if you enjoy what we're building there, I'd really appreciate it if you'd like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, remember, stories matter, listening matters, human connection matters.